The artist and zombie Martin O'Brien is a white man with short brown hair and in his 30s. He's wearing a hooded sweatshirt bearing an enlarged image of a shark, a central motif in the work he's developing for Whitechapel Gallery. Martin talks directly to the camera from within his studio, a large shark head positioned beside him. Parts of Martin's talk to camera are interspersed with clips showing Martin performing the first of a series of texts at Whitechapel, as well as several clips of live footage in which Martin can be seen wielding an axe to, escaping from, and performing with coffins. Please be aware that this content discusses death and BDSM practices.
Let me tell this story. So, around 2009, I was part of a theatre company in Poland. So you had to train, you had to walk in a very particular way, you had to do everything in a very particular way. It's very physically demanding. We were doing these performances and I was just having to subdue the coffin the whole time, you know, because that would break the image, really. I remember this one particular day, I went off and I just coughed so much and there was just mucus pouring out of my mouth and my hands were covered in it, you know, I didn't have tissue, my hands were full of it. And I remember just looking at it and thinking, oh my God, this is what I want to be showing out there. Not backstage, this is what needs to be visible out there. That was a light bulb moment of going, I've actually got to really show this. Hi everybody, my name is Martin O'Brien. I'm an artist and I'm saying this with the tongue in my cheek. I'm a zombie. So I have cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease, and someone born when I was, which is 1987, the average life expectancy was 30 years old. So as I started to approach that, and it became clear that I was going to live longer than I expected, I came up with this idea of zombie time, or the kind of temporal experience of living on when you were expected to already be dead. Death was an obsession growing up for me when I was a kid, and you know, I was sure I would die at 30, so reaching that age and surpassing it, I was born into this zombiedom, into zombie life. So I've been working with performance, mainly long durational performances for around 15 or 16 years, and using long durational performance to think about time, life and death. I'm not interested in exploring what it's like to live with an illness. It doesn't interest me at all. What I'm interested in is using this sick body to try and explore life and death, to think philosophically and politically about what it means to be born with a life-shortening disease, and to make work which really is for everybody and about everybody because it's about death. So I always say that performance is the space where I can be sick in the way that I want to be, and I think that feels important in the kind of art that I make. There's something about agency in it, so I can kind of own illness in that space of performance, and I can play with it. Everything in my work comes from the body and through the body, and the body is central to it. So I use the mucus, which is filling my lungs and killing me as someone with cystic fibrosis. I use the mucus as a material in my performances. The cough I use in my performances. I've worked with piss, I've worked with shit, I've worked with everything that the body produces, and that's really important in my practice, that everything that I'm made of is a kind of material to use. And I'm really interested in what's possible with the body, what kind of images can be built using the body, and sometimes those images are painful. I use BDSM sometimes in my work, or other kind of pain-based practices or endurance-based practices. And it's hard to articulate exactly how I came to work and be really interested in working over very prolonged durations, but I think there's something really interesting in that sort of mode of working for me as someone with a short life expectancy, to then spend these strangely long lengths of time in spaces doing performance for people to come. There's something there interesting in that about a kind of very shortened temporal experience of life, and compared to these sort of long, drawn-out, slow, repetitive performances. A more recent work was at the ICA in London, and that was 4-hour performance every day for 8 days, and that was a really interesting process for me. So usually when I've made performances before, they are contained within a space, and they're contained within a set duration, whatever that is. 12 hours, I don't leave the space for 12 hours, everything in there is part of the performance. But this work at the ICA was 4 hours a day, and I'd go home, and the next day I would come back and start again, and that was a really interesting process of leaving the space, leaving everything where it was, and then returning to it and starting again. There's something about these kind of mini cycles going on, but all adding to a sort of longer cycle, which was the 8-day duration of that exhibition performance. So I work with these long durational performances, but I also work with writing. I write short texts, usually short stories, and kind of speculative rants, theoretical rants. Increasingly, I've started working a little bit with video in collaboration with video makers as well, and performance to camera. So I'm currently the Whitechapel Writer in Residence for 2023, and as part of that I'm making 3 performances and publishing through the Whitechapel, just on their website, 3 texts, the one that will go with each of the performances. Eternity wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't as he'd expected. It wasn't as he'd been promised. He wandered an ashen wasteland, wondering if death would have been preferable to this. The story starts some years earlier. There's a young boy. He was obsessed with death. He thinks of nothing but it. He listens on repeat to Freddie Mercury singing, "Who wants to live forever? I do." And he thinks, me too. As he grows, his obsession continues. He wanted to know everything about death, but he was terrified of it. He was unsure if there was such a thing as an afterlife, and he didn't want to take the chance. He loved the feeling of breathing and wanted to be able to do this for all eternity. The place of writing in my practice has shifted over the years and is still shifting and changing. I'd say up until about maybe 9 or 10 years ago, writing was always part of my work, but it was just part of the studio practice. And writing stories, writing texts was a way for me to figure out the sort of visual vocabulary of the work, of figuring out the colours of the work, the contours of the work, the textures of the work, what it is. And writing still does that for me as well. Writing is totally still that in my in the studio process. But now writing is becoming more and more part of the live performances themselves. So the reading of texts, the reading of stories, the reading of kind of strange prayers, which are going to be in my new work. And the other kind of writing that I really enjoy doing is a sort of more, I call them like philosophical rants or kind of critical rants, which are kind of like often reflections on performance or reflection on the work of other artists. And that kind of writing helps me figure out what I've done and you know, where it's going next. So that's like a bridge often to the next stage of making. What needs to emerge, what am I going to make, and what the hell have I just made, and make sense of it from writing about it afterwards as well. You know, I think all of my work is always a process, so each piece sort of develops out of the previous, and it'll have a different sort of aesthetic, although, you know, there are quite a lot of sort of things that travel between all the pieces and actions that move and keep in every performance almost, but a different framework for each performance, but it does build on from the previous, so it's never like, okay, that's done, let's make something completely different. No. It builds on, it builds on, it builds on. Definitely my way of working has sort of changed a little bit in recent years, where I used to be really prolific, making many performances every year. More recently, that's slowed down. I spend a long time on one project, and that feels like a good way for me to work now. Not moving fast from one to the other, but really spending the time to sink into the process and see what emerges out and play with that, and then develop it and whilst I'm developing it, and then start to think, oh, this would be good in this location, and then can start approaching people that might want to put it on. But it's, you know, really coming out of the process of making the work, and that's always most important. Like, the work's got to be good, the work's got to be the thing that leads it. I have a job at Queen Mary University in the theatre department, and a lot of the work I do with the students there, well, all the work I do with the students there is performance art. I was winner of the Philip Levy-Hume Prize for Visual and Performing Arts in 2022. Yeah, I won this award, which has meant that I can be out of that institution for 2 years and focus on being an artist, go to the studio every day for 2 years and just be a maker. I love teaching, and that's really I feel like that's part of my practice. But having the time away from that for a couple of years has been really, really fantastic. I can immerse myself in practice. I can change the way that I'm working, and I go to the studio every day. And the other thing this award has allowed is, and this time has allowed, is this 1-year residency at the Whitechapel, where I'm making a trilogy of performances. So the first one has happened, that was in May, An Ambulance to the Future, The Second Chance. And it was a story alongside video and kind of action to camera that was being played, and some live action in the space as well. And now I'm working on, and just a couple of weeks out of, the brand new piece, which is an Overture to the End, an Ashen Place, and that is going to be a 4-hour durational performance installation in the gallery at Whitechapel Gallery, with Cherie Rose here as a collaborator. And again, that piece continues these sort of themes and ideas of immortality, but of death and rebirth, of ghosts, of other undead beings. Cherie takes on the sort of figure of this kind of banshee type crone, or a caller of death, a bringer of death. And I'm this thing that's sort of dying and being reborn, dying and being reborn through action-based performance. And these kind of durational processes that unfold over the 4 hours. And I don't want to give any spoilers away about what's actually going to happen in there, but there's going to be some pretty extraordinary images and some quite special things happening in that space.